This is your captain speaking. Thank you for flying Superman Airlines. Fasten your seatbelts.
You are the bossiest damsel in distress I have ever rescued. Also the ugliest, heaviest, and the first.
You are Earth's mightiest heroes, and I've called you together for one reason. The end of the world is here, and it's our job to stop it.
A head start. You're getting soft in your old age.
Don't you have a tall building to go leap?
The Winter Soldier story arc is one of the most famous Captain America stories around. Not only was he a formidable foe for Steve physically, but also emotionally, because it turned out that he was none other than his best friend, who he thought was dead, Bucky Barnes. When the secret was revealed, it was a huge deal for the Captain America comics going forward. Now, of course, when the movie came out, hardcore fans knew who the Winter Soldier was, but that didn't take away from how good the movie was. I mean, it was really good. To this day, it is considered to be one of the best MCU films, and it will stay that way forever. Number 9, The Return of Superman. When Superman died at the hands of Doomsday, the comic world was changed forever. Like, forever. No one thought that DC would ever kill off one of their best-selling characters, but they did. Naturally, fans thought this meant that he was gone for good. But there was no way that DC wanted to let their most famous character stay dead forever. And of course they didn't. Superman did return. It was revealed that he didn't actually die, but he was in a Kryptonian coma that protected him and healed him when he was close to death. I mean, fans were happy that he was back, but by doing so, it opened the floodgates to characters dying and coming back forever. Now, when a character dies in the comics, you know that they will most likely return. It's just how the comic world works. You may not know how or why, but you can bet that they will return. And for a lot of fans, it just kind of takes away from when they actually do die. Number 8, Evil Hal Jordan. Okay, so back in the 90s, DC was like, hey, how do we spice up the Green Lantern sales? Maybe you should bring in a new Green Lantern named Kyle Rayner and make Hal Jordan just go a little bit cuckoo. True story. DC wanted to try and boost sales. So, they made Hal go evil, kill, a couple Green Lanterns, and start calling himself Parallax. Eventually, he was stopped, and Hal even became the Spectre at one point. But the damage was done. Hal was basically at the point of no return. Well, that is until Green Lantern Rebirth in 2004, where Jeff Johns essentially saved Hal Jordan. That series revealed that Hal didn't just go evil on his own, but Parallax was actually this evil cosmic entity that corrupted him. It was really well done, and it saved Hal Jordan as a character. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Kyle Rayner, he's an awesome Green Lantern, but I am so happy they redeemed Hal, because I could just never see him going evil like that for, no reason at all. Number 7, Martian Manhunter on Supergirl. On the TV show Supergirl, we always knew there was something fishy going on with her boss and head of DEO, Hank Henshaw. I mean, right off the bat, they showed his eyes glowed red. But comic fans just assumed that they were teasing him to be Cyborg Superman, like in the comics. But oh boy, were we all wrong. And actually, I don't think we've ever been happier that we were wrong. Turns out that he wasn't Hank Henshaw after all, but John Jones, aka the Martian Manhunter. No one expected that reveal. And on top of that, we got the best live-action version of Martian Manhunter yet. I mean, they completely nailed his look and personality. I still don't know how they managed to pull this off and keep it a secret, but oh man, I'm so happy they did. Number 6, Barry Allen is Savitar. Alright, so this was also a really big deal. I mean, people had so many theories about who Savitar was, but when it turned out to be Barry Allen, it really changed the show. It instantly made Savitar that much more interesting. Don't get me wrong, he was always a cool and scary villain, but he lacked the emotional connection of a Reverse Flash or Zoom. And once the secret was revealed, it instantly made things more interesting. I think the only thing that bugged fans was that they wish they revealed it a little bit sooner in the season so that we could have gotten more of all that evil Barry drama. It really changed up the dynamic because it was Barry that they were fighting. A slightly different version of Barry, but one that had all the same memories as the original. So it made for a very interesting dynamic. Number 5, the unworthy Thor. During the original Sin storyline, Nick Fury whispered something to Thor, and because of whatever he said, Thor became unworthy to wield Mjolnir. That led to someone else pick up the hammer and become Thor. And Thor then went on to become known as Odin's son and star in his own miniseries, The Unworthy Thor. It was a big deal for comic fans, and a lot were wondering what Fury could have possibly said to make Thor unworthy. Turns out that he only said 3 words. Gore was right. This, of course, takes us back a few years to another Thor story, and Gore is referring to Gore the God Butcher. Gore believed that all gods had become unworthy because of their actions, and when Thor heard Fury say those words, it became too real for him. And then he became unworthy. And even though it sucks he lost his hammer, I mean, how cool did he look as the unworthy Thor? I mean, he looked badass, and it gave Thor one of his best stories in years. Number 4. Tony Stark's parents. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it was always known that Tony's parents died in a car accident. Over the years, we kept getting new little pieces of information about it. In Captain America the Winter Soldier, while Steve and Natasha were talking to Zola, you saw how Howard Stark was one of the ones that Hydra ended up taking out. This led fans to theorize how it happened. But in Captain America Civil War, we found out the mother of all secrets. Bucky was the one that killed Tony Stark's parents. And Cap kind of knew about it. This caused massive ramifications in the MCU. It caused Steve and Tony to stop talking. And Tony tried to kill Bucky, but Cap stepped in, and the two had this massive emotional fight. Just goes to show you that one secret can change everything. Number 3. Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. This specific story is still really weird. Even years later, during the 2004 storyline since past, it's revealed that Gwen Stacy actually cheated on Peter with none other than the Green Goblin himself, Norman Osborn. Yep, it's crazy. But this secret isn't over. Because not only were they together, they had kids. Gabriel and Sarah Stacy. Gwen eventually does go back to Peter, and of course, Norman gets mad, and, well, we all know how that story ends. Spoiler, it ends really badly for Gwen. Number 2, Compound V. In the TV show The Boys, superheroes are a well-known thing. They get paid to do what they do. I mean, they're just basically celebrities. They get paid to do what they do. Think of them, they're just kind of like us, celebrities. In that world, it was always believed that some people were just lucky and they were born with powers. But oh no, that would just be too easy. You see, Thought International was secretly injecting babies with something called Compound V, which would give them superpowers. And in turn, they would end up working for them and making God a ton of money. Pretty sneaky, right? I mean, they were just injecting babies and paying off people to keep quiet about it. So evil. But hey, it made for some great television. Number 1, Oliver Queen liked killing. Okay, so in season 5 of Arrow, Adrian Chase, aka Prometheus, was torturing Oliver Queen and made him reveal something that would essentially change the show forever. That after years of being trapped on an island and being forced to kill to survive, Oliver actually ended up liking it. Now, he didn't just like killing in general. It kind of turned into an enjoyment of killing bad people. Regardless, it was a big revelation and also shows just how far he has grown as a character. I mean, he stopped killing altogether after season 1 to honor Tommy. And then he kind of went back to it after, sometimes after some of his friends died and he believed that he shouldn't have been holding back. And then it kind of just turned to he would kill if he had to. Now, does this make him a bad person? No. I mean, the guy experienced all sorts of dark and twisted trauma. I mean, that would just make anyone go a bit crazy. The fact that he was able to channel all that, still be a good person, and kind of use it to save people of the city shows you just how good of a person he actually truly is.
At number 10, we have the Rainbow Batman suit from Detective Comics number 241. This is the suit where we get to see Bruce Wayne's fashionista persona as he gets to fight crime in all sorts of different colored suits, from green to purple to yellow to white to red, which on the cover looks more like a neon pink to me. And of course, rainbow. Now, you might wonder why the Dark Knight would want to wear all these costumes, but as always when it comes to Batman, the explanation is purely logical and slightly convoluted. See, the Bat Diva did this in order to draw attention towards himself and away from Robin, who earlier had performed a heroic act as Dick Grayson, pushing a girl out of the way of a speeding car and injuring his arm in the process. And since Batman don't believe in work from home culture, and to his credit it is the 50s, he takes the money he would have spent on Robin's paid leave and cops himself some new fancy outfits so that no one would pay attention to Robin's arm and realize his secret identity. If you're enjoying the video so far, do me a quick solid and support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Goes a long way. Thanks guys. At number 9, we have Raven's New 52 redesign from Teen Titans number 17. Raven's original cloak is simple, elegant, and iconic, and so to recapitulate that essence for the New 52, they took all that and put it in the garbage and just went, Raven? Needs feathers. Listen, I know she's supposed to be gloomy and mysterious and whatnot, but covering her face completely is stupid, and what they covered it with looks ridiculous. Not to mention the whole bird theme as a whole is severely uninspired. And also the knee pads. Why does she need freaking knee pads? Heck, if you're gonna take it that far, you might as well throw in some elbow pads, shin guards, and a jock strap for good measure. Morons. At number 8, we have Cyborg Spider-Man from Spider-Man number 21. This is probably the most 90s Spider-Man costume out there, though I wouldn't be surprised if one of you guys in the comments proved me wrong. Solo nearly ended Spider-Man, believing him to be Doc Ock thanks to an illusion cast onto him by Mysterio. But Peter was rescued in the nick of time by Cyborg X, who took him to Care Labs to get fixed up, where he would awake with a new metal cast, an eyepiece, and some stitches. He was even gifted a utility belt, though Spidey never puts this one to use. And while the original version of the Cyborg suit is disbanded fairly quickly, probably on account of it being so hard to look at, it's worth mentioning that a Pete from a different timeline decided to go all in with the cybernetic enhancements, leading to a truly cyborg Spider-Man whose costume is seriously done right. We're even gonna get a fresh take of the character on screen in the next Spider-Verse movie with Cyborg Spider-Woman, and I'm all about it. Well, save for the spiky shoulder guard. Personally, I feel it's a little bit out of place, but maybe we'll get a good enough explanation for it in the movie, but probably not. At number 7, we have the Superman Unchained armor from Superman Unchained number 7. Okay, look, we can all agree that the Unchained armor is undoubtedly badass looking. That's not my point here. My gripe is the fact that Superman's wearing it. You see, Cal dons the armor when he realizes that he's vulnerable to attack from the weapons wielded by General Lane's army. And the suit, which comes with a hammer and shield, is able to withstand a few blows that supposedly would have one-shot the Man of Steel. Okay then, so why does he need a shield? He is Superman after all. It's not like he needs anything other than his fists for combat. Or better yet, why doesn't he just ditch the suit altogether and just keep the shield, as it proves to be far more effective at sponging blows from Lane's weapons than the armor is. And don't even get me started on the hammer, which is literally only there to rip off Mjolnir. Not to mention how uncharacteristic and lazy it is of Superman just to put on thicker armor when a greater threat presents itself. Because it would have been much more satisfying to see Superman outwit his opponent instead of just out-tanking him. Like, okay, DC, listen up. Maybe you can use this design for some sort of Thor, Darth Maul, Megazord hybrid character, but Superman, guy doesn't need it. Give it to someone else. At number 6, we have Iron Man's nose from Iron Man number 68. There's change in the air. I can smell it. One of the most iconic examples of a redesign gone wrong, we have that period of time where Tony Stark thought it would be a good idea to include a nose in his mask to make him look more expressive and help strike fear into the heart of his enemies. Buddy, the only thing you're striking me with is an intense desire to laugh in your face, because let's face it, the addition of a big metal nose ain't exactly intimidating. Now you might be wondering why Marvel would even give him a nose in the first place. Well, the story goes that one day Stan Lee was complaining about one of the studio's new artists. See, Stan thought that Tony's eyes were too close to the surface of the helmet for there to be any room for a nose underneath the mask, and so Stan asked, where's his nose? The editors took this to mean that Iron Man should have a nose, and so they gave him one. That is, until Stan caught wind of the change a few issues later and demanded that the editors change it back. At number 5, we have Hawkeye's tunic in Avengers number 72. Good lord, dude! Pants! Not only is Hawkeye one of the bravest Avengers on account of him being super powerless, but to stand shoulder to shoulder with Earth's mightiest heroes in what's effectively a dress is a whole new level of courage. Not to mention that this was right after some very questionable decisions led to Hank Pym turning Hawkeye into the size-changing Goliath. Not to mention that this was right after some very questionable decisions that led to Hank Pym turning Hawkeye into the size-changing Goliath, who sports an equally decisive costume, that one including those redundant bolted shoulder and waist straps. Sorry to say, buddy, but this fit just makes you look arrogant. Arrogant? No? Okay, I tried. At number 4, we have Captain America's exoskeleton, debuting in Captain America number 438. On yet another edition of Why Does This Hero Need a Whole Suit of Armor, we have Captain America. And while his excuse is a little better than Superman's, it's still pretty lame. You see, Steve Rogers became completely paralyzed by an illness brought on by the very super soldier serum that granted him his superpowers in the first place. And so in order to allow Cap to continue his crime-fighting career, Tony Stark fashioned him this exoskeleton. And after getting some implants that would enable him to operate it, Cap was back in action. Now, I've included this one on the list because the whole concept is a bit ridiculous. I mean, Super Soldier Serum-induced paralysis just makes the serum itself completely redundant. Like, if you wanted to give Cap an Iron Man suit, just give Cap an Iron Man suit and do away with the whole degenerative disease nonsense. I mean, Spidey got an Iron Man suit, more than one, and he didn't need to get paralyzed to earn it. At number 3, we have Plaid Daredevil. Okay, this next one is seriously cruel, and if you laugh, your soul is going straight to Mephisto. This panel comes from What If Volume 2, number 17, the comic that asks, what if Daredevil had a dishonest tailor? To which Kingpin and Punisher are seen laughing in his face. See, I think this is dumb, not because of the plaid, although it is pretty ugly, but because it's uncharacteristic. You see, Daredevil wouldn't have gotten ripped off. He can't. He can literally smell fear and dishonesty. It's what makes him such a good lawyer. So either this universe's Daredevil is missing one of his most crucial hyper senses, or he's Canadian. Either way, it's nothing to laugh about. At number 2, we have Hulk, the Horseman of War from Incredible Hulk number 456. That's right, not only has Hulk been a villain, an Avenger, a space gladiator, and the conqueror of entire planets, but now we can add first non-mutant war horseman of the apocalypse to his resume as well. His armor, made from celestial tech, allows him to accomplish feats of strength with ease, which the irregular Hulk would probably find at least a little strenuous, like picking up and tossing an entire Egyptian pyramid, for instance. His helmet also has the added bonus of calming his inner demons, allowing the Hulk to become more cold and calculated. And if I'm being honest with you guys, the real reason I included this costume on the list is because it makes Hulk look like a jacked version of Marvin the Martian. Am I the only one who's made this connection? Can't be. And at number 1, we have Mangaverse's Black Panther, who made his very first in-costume appearance in Marvel Mangaverse Eternity Twilight. The Marvel Mangaverse has plenty of questionable redesigns. I'm looking at you, Spider Gloves. But when it comes to the King of Wakanda, boy oh boy did they do him dirty. See, instead of utilizing the vibranium of his homeland to build himself a super suit, T'Challa of Earth 2301 seems to have replaced his sacred herb powers with the spirit of Kwamatha, transforming him into a furry. As if things weren't furry enough with Tigra around, who, after watching T'Challa transform, immediately gets the heart-shaped eyes for him, anime style. Okay, look, maybe I wouldn't have so much hate for the suit if there was a suit to begin with, as the King's suggestively shaped loincloth leaves very little to the imagination, and the bat ears. Ugh, why is he the only anthropomorph with hyper-realistic ears?
Number 10, Sentry. And the circle of people getting ripped in half continues. It's a vicious circle indeed, let me tell you. Sentry is often actually a perpetrator of this kind of gruesome and brutal death, but this time around he was on the receiving half of this murder method. This all went down during the King in Black event. When Null first arrived on Earth, Sentry was one of the first heroes to attempt to stand up against him and defeat him. Being the Sentry, he egotistically assumed he would easily be powerful enough to defeat Null. While Sentry tried to rip him in half, it was Null who managed to get a solid enough grip on Bob Reynolds to tear him asunder. Sentry would then be escorted by Valkyrie, aka Jane Foster, to the halls of Valhalla, and while on their way there, another shocking revelation would come to light. That some of the Valkyries were still alive, trapped, but alive, and upon being found by Jane and Sentry and freed, were able to kind of return once more. Pretty cool. It should be noted too that Sentry's death and defeat was also so shocking because it took place in issue number 1 of the King in Black series, in essence being one of the defeats that kicked off this event.
Elektra. You could say that Elektra was a victim of the well-known Daredevil villain Bullseye, but you could also say she was a victim of Frank Miller's gripping and at times very dark writing. In issue number 181 of Daredevil Volume 1, we watch Elektra and Bullseye square off in a bloody battle, which ultimately ends in Bullseye spearing Elektra right through the stomach and out her back. It's a really brutal event that changes Daredevil as a character entirely from that point on. And it's important to remember that in 1982, which is when that issue was released, a death like this for such a well-known hero wasn't quite as common as what we might be used to today. And it's not like she was resurrected again either, which is usually how this type of thing goes. She is completely done in the Daredevil timeline, only showing up in her own limited series and a couple other comics here and there.
Number 8, Batman. Although it doesn't seem surprising on paper, when Batman was seemingly killed by Darkseid, it caught a lot of folks off guard. That that is because Batman is such a mainstay. He isn't a character that dies often, and definitely not in a way that feels as permanent as this if he does die. Although the idea of Batman being killed by Darkseid might not seem that surprising, because I mean Darkseid's pretty OP, Batman actually had a pretty decent plan for taking the villain out, and actually was successful using a Radion bullet. Batman successfully hit Darkseid in the chest, but not before his Omega beams could do their work. Although it seemed as though Batman was obliterated as a result of being hit by the Omega beams, it turned out that what had actually happened was a power called the Omega Sanction, which is also kind of what Darkseid's Omega beams are. And those had been used to transport Batman back through time, so he would return, but not before having weird time travel adventures.
Wolverine. While Wolverine has faced his death at the hands of Sentinels before, which actually results in his death, sort of, I figured that I would cover one of his defeats that doesn't really end in his death, but I'd say it's even more shocking and brutal, so here it is. It's when the Punisher shoots Wolverine in the face and then decides to run him over with a steamroller. This shocking and quite ridiculous defeat takes place in The Punisher number 17 and is rather uncalled for given how brutal it is. Wolverine is just sort of intervening in one of Frank Castle's missions, which, to be fair, Wolverine does do a lot, but it doesn't constitute shooting his face skin off and then flattening him into the ground with a steamroller. It's just a rough scene to witness, and I think the Punisher needs to apologize.
Number 6. Tim Drake. Recently, Robin, Tim Drake, had a big glow up. He came out as bisexual and was celebrated in his very own Pryde issue. However, even the fact that the character seems to be coming up more into his own and uplifted for his sense of identity could not protect him from an awful demise that was just around the corner. Enter Batman issue number 125. Here Batman and Robin go up against Penguin and come face to face as well with Clayface. But what makes it even worse is while they were attempting to evacuate a charity gala whose attendees' lives Penguin was threatening, Robin got taken out by a goon with a gun. Just a goon with a gun. Ugh, brutal. While Robin would be stabilized, it was pretty shocking to see a character who had recently been so celebrated for identity and diversity taken out so easily and on the brink of life or death. Also, note to self, never attend a charity gala in Gotham. It pretty much never ends well.
Captain Marvel, or Marvel, the dude one. This is sort of a sad entry because he isn't defeated by any one villain, nor does he come back from it like some others may on this list. The culprit in this case is actually cancer. I don't know what happened in 1982, but this event was also published in 1982 like the Elektra thing, and was actually known as the first graphic novel to be released by Marvel. It was called The Death of Captain Marvel, of course, and it chronicled the adventures of Marvel venturing into a dark dimension where he's exposed to compound 13, which is a nerve gas that gives him an incurable cancer. He's then visited by friends on the planet Titan, even getting a courtesy convoy sent over by the Skrulls, who pay their respects in his final moments. The craziest part about this is that Captain Marvel doesn't ever come back, save for one time when the Grandmaster brings him back briefly as a kind of ghost, but other than that, he's known to be out of the comics for good after this one. Sad.
Number 4. Captain Kate. One of the most shocking defeats and demises happened not really to just Kate, but also to Lockheed. Poor Lockheed. Not Lockheed, leave Lockheed alone. This all went down in volume 1 of Marauders from 2020. At the end of issue number 6, Kitty Pryde faces off with Sebastian Shaw, who while considered to be a mutant who is allied with the nation of Krakoa, and so in that respect is technically a hero, I guess, has also a history of being a really nasty villain. And that is exactly what he was up to here. He kills Kate in cold blood by exploiting her weakness that at the time she struggled to phase through Krakoan organic material and gates. So he found some fast growing vine pods and unleashed them on her while trapping Lockheed in a net, which he then dropped into the sea, and then promptly sinking the boat she was aboard. One of the worst things about this too is Kate is even like, look, you can have all the seats on the Hellfire Trading Company. I don't care, just please let me save Lockheed. And Shaw's like, no. Considering that Kate was basically the main character of this series who possibly could not be resurrected, it was pretty shocking at the time. I was shocked. I was very shocked.
At number 3 is Superman. Back in 1992, a comic book called The Death of Superman was published, in which Superman is actually killed by Doomsday. The battle rages on for quite a while against this hyper-adaptable villain, with Superman showing serious signs of exhaustion as Metropolis gets more and more damaged. This being a multi-issue publication, the actual death of Superman takes place in issue number 75, which is quite a while into the series. And while it's easy for us to find that issue online today, back then, readers were waiting months to see what happened to their favorite Kryptonian. I mean, with a title like that and leaving the event right to the end, I sort of rank this as more of a publicity stunt than anything else, but whether there is marketing involved or not, there's no doubt that this event was a shock to fans, who at the time were unsure if they'd ever see another Superman comic again. Thankfully though, but also sort of expectedly, DC then released Reign of the Supermen, which chronicled the return of the hero and is known to have sold just about the same number of copies as the death of Superman.
Number 2, Green Arrow. Green Arrow's death was quite startling because he was basically kind of the person behind it. Rather than do something, he sort of just let himself be killed and defeated. And I know there's probably going to be Oliver Queen fans in the comments. They're going to be like, no, he sacrificed himself. But look, it just seems a little silly to me, okay? While beaten by the enemy, he also just kind of gave up. This all went down when Oliver Queen was blown up by a bomb that threatened to detonate upon arriving in Metropolis. Rather than let that happen or give up his arm, which was stuck in the detonator case or chamber, he decided to just surrender and sacrifice himself to save innocent people, allowing himself and the plane he was in to basically be blown up. The really crazy part of this story is that Superman was right there, and while he wasn't coming up with any amazing ideas, other than one that would cause Green Arrow to lose his arm in exchange for his life, which Green Arrow was definitely not willing to do, Soup still likely could have done something else that would save Metropolis and Ollie, and likely have allowed him to keep his arm as well, because after all, this is Superman we're talking about. If only he'd had the time to think of something better. It is hard to think of things on the spot, especially when, you know, a bomb is about to explode, so fair enough.
Finally, at number 1, we have Peter Parker. I only don't call him Spider-Man in this entry because firstly, this is the Earth 1610 Peter Parker, and secondly because he's from the Ultimate Spider-Man series. And either way, the Spider-Man mantle is still very much alive, obviously. But this is still one of the most brutal and unexpected defeats for any superhero, partly because Peter Parker is still only a teenager in this issue where he meets his fate. That, and partly also because his final battle takes place right outside of his house in front of his friends and family. Facing off against the Sinister Six in a multi-issue battle, Peter is entirely helpless, getting ravaged over and over again by the group of villains, and no one really comes to his rescue, other than Aunt May, who actually takes out Elektra with a revolver. Spanning between issues 156 and 160 of Ultimate Spider-Man, this loss takes its time and ends with deafening silence as Aunt May and MJ cry over Peter's dead body, and the series just ends. It's a rough defeat that some people forget about, maybe because it's not from our dimension. But hey, it's still a young Spider-Man dying at the hands of a huge gang of bad guys, no matter which way you splice it.
Number 10, Iron Man. Now you're probably thinking, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing, Jack. Starting off with an easy one, and you're absolutely right. But I'm not sure if you know exactly which Iron Man redesign I'm going to be talking about. When I think of redesigns, I normally think of these huge changes, but in this case, even the smallest change can have a big impact. Iron Man may have more redesigns than any other character besides the Wasp, so he obviously has had his share of bad looks, but nothing is as unsettling as the time he had a nose on his helmet. The smooth face mask that we're all familiar with was the norm for a while until 1974's The Invincible Iron Man number 68, when he for some reason showed up with a new mask that accentuated his schnoz. Now in this issue, Iron Man explains that the new look will help him strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, and it definitely works because he looks way more menacing, but I see no other benefit unless he's trying to just, I don't know, sniff out his enemies. Take some time to look at it for yourself and see if you agree with me when I say I'm glad this one didn't stick around for too long. Number 9, Nightwing. Dick Grayson, the original Robin, has probably one of the funniest designs on this list today, based solely on appearance alone, mostly because it's so dated. Hopefully we're all familiar with the current Nightwing suit, you know, the skin-tight black suit with a simple bluebird design that covers his chest and a portion of his arms. Well, the one that I want to mention is actually his original costume that I personally call Disco Nightwing, and once I explain the costume, I'm sure you'll agree with me. When Dick set out on his own as a crime-fighting vigilante, he decided to model his suit after his late father's trapeze costume, which is super sweet in theory. The result, however, was a hilariously awful dark blue jumpsuit with a massive robin eggs blue collar that was popped and yellow accents that were supposed to look like feathers. I've also spent a ton of time trying to figure out exactly why there was a triangle midsection there, but I don't know, maybe it's to showcase his abs. Honestly, who knows? Either way, I'm happy we got a couple redesigns that eventually got us to the suit that we see today. Check out this original costume for yourself and let me know if you're digging it as much as I do. Number 8, Star-Lord. Taking a short break from looking at costumes, which I'm very glad were redesigned in this case by the way, let's talk about the 5 retcons that happened with Star-Lord. Originally, Star-Lord's stories were set in the future, and Peter Quill's also born on a very special astrological date, and his mother was killed by some rogue aliens, and then he devoted his life to becoming an astronaut. He encountered the Master of the Sun, at which point he became the Star-Lord, complete with a special gun. Chris Claremont and John Byrne revealed that the reason Quill's mother was killed by aliens was because his father was an alien, and that Quill was actually the heir to a throne of an entire alien planet. Doug Munch then added a bizarre retcon where it was revealed that the Master of the Sun was secretly one of the aliens who had killed Quill's mother. Then Keith Giffen then retconned that whole set in the future aspect of Star-Lord's origin and brought him squarely into the Marvel Universe, getting rid of that whole half-alien plot point in the process. Brian Michael Bendis then retconned the origins so that Star-Lord never met the Master of the Sun, and the special gun was just a gift from his alien father, and he became an interstellar hero all on his own. Recently, Sam Humphries roughly combined the origins, with Quill still being an astronaut, only now he stole a ship and ended up encountering space pirates who introduced him into the world of space adventure. Check out all these origins for yourself, starting with Star-Lord's first appearance in 2004's Thanos, number 8. Number 7, Batgirl. Throughout the years, Batgirl was portrayed more often than not as the cutesy kid sister sidekick kind of character. She was a purple-clad add-on to the Bat family with red hair streaming out from underneath the cowl with some truncated horns. She was, in short, an afterthought, a Batman light in every form, including the name. Then came the speechless martial artist Cassandra Cain, the 4th Batgirl, who brought a violent, no-nonsense style to Batgirl, and her costume very much reflected that. She looked like an assassin, a true threat to the criminal underworld that would inspire fear and awe. Cloaked in black with only a yellow outline of the iconic bat symbol on her chest, she was a weapon of her own. The sewn-up mask, reflecting her inability to talk, made her all the more menacing, and during her time as Batgirl, she went toe-to-toe against Deathstroke while teamed up with her half-sister Marquis. She eventually turned her Batgirl costume over to Stephanie Brown and became a member of Batman Incorporated as Black Bat. Check out Cassandra Cain for yourself in their first appearance in 1999's Batman number 567. Number 6, Wonder Woman. If you're familiar with Michael Deodato Jr., then you probably know which Wonder Woman redesign that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, for some reason, Mike had this deep desire to take some of our favorite characters and just turn them into fashion abominations. In the 90s, Wonder Woman's mother, Queen Hippolyta, saw a vision of Wonder Woman being killed in the near future. In order to prevent this, she concocted a ridiculous scheme that involved disowning her daughter and crowning someone else Wonder Woman, with the idea that this new Wonder Woman would be killed and her daughter would be spared, because, you know, she's a classy person and family always comes first. After some challenges and a little behind the scenes manipulation by Queen Hippolyta, Diana relinquishes the title of Wonder Woman to her fellow Amazon Artemis. Needless to say, she wasn't super happy with just sitting around though while Artemis was out on the streets kicking butt and taking names, so Diana decided to grab a pair of bike shorts, a leather bra, and a crop top jacket so she could still fight crime, just not as Wonder Woman. Although, she still had a Wonder Woman belt. I don't know, it's all just very confusing. Thankfully, the days of blatant over-sexualization of strong female characters seems to be a thing of the past because this costume didn't last for too long, and soon enough she returned to her classic costume. Want to see how interesting this costume is for yourself? Well, then check out 1995's Wonder Woman Volume 2, number 93. Number 5, Donna Troy. With a total of 7 retcons, Donna Troy's origins are pretty confusing. When Wonder Girl made her debut, she was literally Wonder Woman as a teenager. Eventually, Wonder Woman shared her comic with her younger self when Wonder Girl was part of the Teen Titans. Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl were then seemingly revealed to be sisters, and eventually Marv Wolfman revealed that Wonder Girl was Donna Troy, an orphan taken in by the Amazons following a fire. During New Teen Titans, Wolfman then revealed that Donna was part of a baby trafficking ring, and after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Donna was instead an orphan that had been raised by the mythological Titans to be a new Titan in the future. Later it was revealed that Donna was actually a magical double of Wonder Woman created when Diana was a child, and then this allowed Donna to become a part of the Wonder Woman storyline once again, as she was a part of the Wonder Woman family now. After quote-unquote dying, Donna was temporarily revived and led to believe that she was a moon goddess as part of a plot by the Titans of Myth. Then in the New 52, Donna was now a double of Diana once again. However, during the DC Rebirth, Wally West told Donna that he remembered her from his past for some reason, so she was in the midst of yet another origin retcon at that time. Check out Donna's multiple stories for yourself, starting with their first appearance in 1965, The Brave and the Bold number 60. Number 4, Thor. Another Mike Deodato Jr. redesign that really just did not work or stick around for too long. It really takes an imaginative and somewhat unhinged mind to look at the God of Thunder and go, you know what would be cool? If we made Thor just a little bit more metal. Mike reimagined Thor as a cross between an 80s hair metal music video and Fabio, effectively stripping him of any Nordic qualities, which is, you know, kind of Thor's whole thing. The most confusing thing about this unprompted and out of the blue design, in my opinion, is the fact that Mjolnir is attached to Thor via a massive chain, like the world's most impractical chain wallet, lasting for only 4 issues before Thor reappeared with his more traditional costume. Now the one good thing that we got out of this costume was it was meant to bring light to the idea of sexualization of characters in comic books, you know, something that female characters are much more familiar with than the males, so Mike wanted to try and change that a little bit. Check out this costume redesign for yourself, starting with its first appearance in 2004's Thor Visionaries, Mike Deodato Jr., Volume 1, Number 1. Number 3, X-Men. Individually, the X-Men have had many redesigns over the years. I mean, just take a look at Wolverine alone, but as a team, there have been 2 major changes that I feel deserve to be talked about. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with the classic yellow and blue color scheme that the original X-Men wore, with their unique flair thrown in there. But when Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely took the reins for their run with the mutant hero team, they brought a collective identity with them. The black jackets, decorated with a large yellow X and small yellow X patches on the arms, granted the group a very modern look without taking anything away from the characters themselves. This redesign was a perfect way to bring the X-Men into a new age, however, not every iteration can be a hit. In 2011's X-Men and Wolverine solo anime series, the characters just seem, I don't know, off in a way that I can't really explain. Like, whoever designed Wolverine didn't seem to get the memo that he's supposed to be short, burly, and just a muscular animal of a man, and not an anime pretty boy with a mullet. And, well, the other X-Men designs aren't that much better. Check out these designs for yourself in 2001 to 2004's New X-Men and in 2011's X-Men TV's miniseries. Number 2, Lobo. Another character who has had a couple redesigns over the years, one that we're very thankful for, and one that, I'm not too sure about. If you're like me, then you probably didn't realize that Lobo's original design was very different and a whole lot less edgy than his modern look. In 1983's Omega Men number 3, Lobo made his first debut and was wearing a purple and orange onesie-like costume that made him look more crazy than scary. However, fans fell in love with the character very quickly, and this led to a redesign for him that turned him into the iconic biker anti-hero that we all know and love. However, in 2011, when DC established the New 52, DC decided to revamp Lobo from the ground up by asserting that the old Lobo, the one that fans love, was actually an imposter, and that the real Lobo had been traveling across the galaxy in order to stake claim to his name and destroy the imposter. This new Lobo had a very sleek look and suave aura about him, which immediately set him apart from his imposter, but he was just as powerful and dangerous. New 52 Lobo was last seen held captive in one of Brainiac 2.0's bottles. Take a look at him and his story for yourself, starting with 2013's Justice League Volume 2, number 23.2, Lobo. And number 1, Sue Storm. This seems to be unanimously one of the worst redesigns in comic book history. Now, it's pretty common knowledge that the Fantastic Four have never really been too fashion forward. Their costumes resemble footy pajamas with boots more than costumes, but nonetheless, they perfectly represented the legendary quartet. Appearing at a time when women in media were urged to be more subservient lest they inspire deviant behavior, Sue often played second fiddle to the rest of Marvel's first superhero family. However, in the 90s, Sue received an overhauled attitude, and she received one of the worst costumes in the history of female superheroes. Gone was the bodysuit, and it was replaced with short shorts and a skin-tight top with a cutout on her chest in the shape of a 4. Now, it was later revealed that Psycho Man somehow managed to manipulate Sue's repressed negative feelings and turned her into a separate entity called Malice, who took over Sue's body and proceeded to act very classless. But still, there was no need for this redesign at all. It took about a year, but Sue eventually returned to her classic bodysuit, and thankfully, she has not been over-sexualized since then.
Number 10, Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler. Oh boy. I still think to this day one of the weirdest facts about him is that he's the son of Mystique and Azazel, a demon who claims to be the devil. Azazel is also weird in the sense that he comes with his own lore as part of a race of demonic mutants known as the Neophim, who were opposed to a race of angelic looking mutants known as the Chearophim, that apparently Angel is also one of. Nightcrawler would be abandoned shortly after he was born by his mother, who was fleeing an angry mob. He'd be taken in by a family tied to magic, the Zardoses, and later would also end up dating his foster sister, Jermaine Zardos, who we'd later come to know as Amanda Sefton. Which, I mean, granted she was kind of undercover at the time, but still, I feel like if you know your foster sister, you know who your foster sister is. I don't think her being like, my name's Amanda, would change it for me. I'd be like, wait, but you look exactly like my foster sister. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love when we talk about weird stuff, we have a weirdest playlist for you to check out, so go check that out after. Number 9, Booster Gold. Booster Gold is a time-traveling hero from the future, and from the look of him, you might not even guess this, considering that for a hero who should hail from a more advanced timeline, he often isn't known for being one of the best or the brightest. Booster Gold was actually Michael Carter, who was born during the 25th century in Gotham. His dad left his family when he was young to pursue his obsession with gambling, and leaving his family deep in debt. In order to help his sick mother, Michael would eventually also follow in his father's footsteps to earn the money he needed to help her get well again. His mother would end up being saved, but following the revelation of how Michael had gotten that money through gambling, was also shamed by her son's actions. Michael decided to make things right and set it on a path to make something of himself, and while working as a security guard at a museum, was inspired by the heroes on display there, stealing tech from the museum to travel to the past and become a hero himself, also using his knowledge of the past that he had as someone who came from the future. So he's actually a security guard from the future with basic museum tech, using it to parade around as a hero, which is pretty funny, especially when you consider Skeets, his little droid that flies around and helps him out, actually is just like basically security tech from the museum. It's like one of those things that's supposed to walk you around the museum and be like, this exhibit is this, here is the history. Number 8, Jean Grey. Jean Grey is not a character you likely think of when you think of unbelievable origins. However, there are some things that I feel like we gotta talk about. Probably you wouldn't think of that because her origin is often explained away by her status as a mutant, but trust me, it gets kinda weird. Jean was only a young girl when her powers first manifested, with her mind becoming bonded to the mind of a young schoolmate just as said schoolmate was hit by a car and basically lay dying. This left Jean pretty much traumatized, and her parents ended up reaching out to Professor Charles Xavier eventually for help. Xavier ultimately placed a mental block in Jean's mind in order to protect her against her insanely powerful telepathic abilities. Years later, Jean would join his school for gifted youngsters, and Charles would also creepily fantasize about what a potential romantic relationship would be like with Jean. Pretty weird, considering everything else we now know. Although he knew this would of course never be possible. Not because he was, years her senior as well as her teacher and her mentor, but because he was confined to a wheelchair. Those are his thoughts, not mine. Oh Charles. Number 7, Hitman. Definitely a strange one, and thank you to Pablo in the comments for the suggestion, who suggested it on my part 1. Well, I'm not really sure if it was intended as a suggestion, but that's definitely how I took it, so here we go. Hitman is Tommy Monahan, the son of a lady of the night who was based in Gotham. His mom, named Catherine Monahan, took to naming her children after the men who used her services and who were the biological fathers of said children, in an attempt to shame them. However, Tommy's father, Tom Dawson, was not a fan of this and actually warned Catherine, threatening her life that she should not do that. Stubborn, she did so anyways with him, which resulted in her life and the life of her offspring, save Tommy, being lost. Tommy would grow up in a Catholic orphanage and would go on to serve in the military before becoming a hitman. Despite the fact that he was an assassin in the DC universe, Tommy was still considered to be a hero because he avoided killing people who he deemed to be good. During one of his jobs, he ended up in a confrontation with a bloodline parasite, a dragon-like parasitic alien, who attempted to kill him by drinking his spinal fluid, because that's what those guys do. The parasite's attempt failed, and afterwards Tommy observed that he now had low-level telepathic powers. This is a true story from a comic. I mean, it's not a true story, but in the comics world, it's a true story. That happened. Number 6, the Fantastic Four. While the Fantastic Four have become an iconic superhero team as Marvel's first family, when you think about it, their origin story is pretty strange. Reed Richards was the mastermind behind their transformation, which actually happened not by his own design, but kind of by accident. After facing the threat of a loss of funding for his Starship project, Reed decided to prove the merits of said project by taking his Starship, the Marvel One, on a test flight, which would thereby prove its worth should the flight be successful, which of course Reed was like, it'll be successful, it'll be great, we're not gonna worry about the fact that I shouldn't even legally probably be doing this. While his friend Ben Grimm was always set to pilot this flight, Reed also agreed to bring along his girlfriend Susan Storm and her younger brother Johnny, who at that time really had no space or flight qualifications to speak of that I know of, and thanks to a storm of cosmic rays, the four were forever changed by the flight, as we know. It's weird that the four of them were the ones that ended up on it. Especially Sue being like, hey, can I bring Johnny, my brother? It's like, sure, why not? We got 4 seats, let's do it. Number 5, Green Lantern. For this origin tale, we're going all the way back to the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott, who also technically isn't really the same kind of Green Lantern as those who would come after him. Instead of being given his powers by the Lantern Corps and the Guardians of the Universe, Scott was basically given his powers and saved by the Green Lantern of Life, later established as an entity held prisoner by the Guardians known as Starheart. In the original story in All American Comics issue number 16, the green light first crash landed to Earth and used its flame in China to bring death, then in America, new life, curing a man who was once insane, and finally saving Alan Scott and granting him the gift of power. Which I also feel like that's kind of weird because it's like, first there was death, then there was life, now there's power. But I'm like, but you also saved Alan Scott's life, so technically it was like death, life, power. Life power. It's like 2 gifts, really. Number 4, Dazzler. One of my all-time favorite heroes in the comics, Allison Blair, definitely has a strange origin. She is a mutant, which relative to comics is not actually that strange, of course, because there are many mutants. In Marvel Comics there are many other ones at this point that exist, and they have actually become probably some of the most popular groups around in terms of the comic publisher. However, even among mutants, Allison's story is kind of odd. After learning her mutant powers, she was not compelled or inspired like so many others out there to become a hero. Instead, she wanted to use her powers to entertain others and give herself kind of a career boost. Allison's powers often get downplayed, but they are actually insanely powerful. She can transmute sound into light. She can use this light to do a bunch of different things, including shooting powerful lasers, creating massive light explosions, and completely obliterating her enemies. Like literally she's turned people into, I mean, nothing, because they were just like vaporized basically. But that's never really been what Daz is actually about. Instead, she usually just wants to sing and perform while on tour with her band while being accepted for who she is by the world as well as her family and her friends. Built into her origins was also the mystery of what happened to her mother and a dramatic relationship with her father, who kicked her out after she didn't follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer. And I love that these are like major things in her series, as opposed to it being about, you know, like constantly fighting bad guys. That happens too, but it's always like, oh boy, how'd I get myself in this situation? Number 3, Martian Manhunter. John Johns definitely has a strange origin story that sounds so fantastical to imagine, especially when you consider some of the weird coincidences involved in it. He was born as a twin, highly unlikely in Martian culture. His twin, however, was considered a mutant, born without any telepathic abilities. As such, his brother, Ma-Alefa-Ak, grew up to hate his people and created a virus to destroy them that infected Martians through their telepathy. On Mars, John was a police officer, and in an attempt to protect his family against this virus, he tried to convince them not to use their telepathic gifts, which they did try to do, but unfortunately that didn't work. This failed, and he lost both his wife. This failed, and he lost both his daughter and his wife, who went up in flames as the virus preyed on the Martians' natural fear of flames, intensifying it to the point that those infected would simply just like burst into flames. Shortly after this, he was pulled to Earth via an experiment of Dr. Saul Erdel, who created a device in an attempt to communicate with aliens, aiming this device at Mars. The device reached across space and time and captured John, who was brought to Earth and made to forget this past trauma through Erdel. The two had basically developed a mental link, and Erdel used this to craft a different backstory for John, which was implanted in the Martian's mind. And he did this kind of as a kindness to like help him get over everything that had happened to him. On Earth, John would disguise himself as a human police detective going by the name John Jones. Number 2, Magic. Magic definitely has a pretty weird one when it comes to her origin, and I saw all y'all in the comments on part 1 being like, but where's Magic? Magic should be on here. You're right, Magic is pretty cool, and that's why she's so high up on this part. She is the younger sister of Colossus and Mikhail Rasputin. Initially, she was kidnapped and held hostage in exchange for the X-Men fighting to free Arcade from Dr. Doom's clutches. Once safe, she ended up moving to the US to live with her brother and the X-Men. However, shortly after this move, young Illyana was once again kidnapped, this time by the powerful demon lord Belasco, who sensed great power in her and took her to Limbo. Here she would be raised to become Belasco's possible heir and also his tool, with him exerting control over her. Eventually, she would return home and would also conquer Limbo, usurping Belasco to become the Dimension's ruler, forever changed from her terrifying time being both tormented and kinda trained in the Hell Dimension. Interesting. Number 1, The Flash. What gave the Flash, Barry Allen, his powers? It turns out he did. Well, initially in the comics, Barry is seen as getting his powers from being doused in chemicals and struck by lightning in his lab following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was retconned that the lightning that actually struck Barry was in fact kind of because of Barry, who was kind of transformed into lightning following his death in Crisis. In Secret Origins issue number 2 from the 80s, we learned that Barry went back in time and kind of gave his past self a choice between becoming a hero and having a shorter life, or possibly having a longer, more normal life. Barry, of course, chose lightning, and here we are. So in a way, Barry actually gave himself his powers because of the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. It's a paradox. Number 10, Spider-Woman. I love Jessica Drew, but her origin story really is just straight up weird. I even was explaining it to someone who is not familiar with her as Spider-Woman the other day, and even just hearing myself explain, it sounded weird to me too. I was like, just go with me here, it's a strange story. Jessica Drew was very young when she got sick, possibly because her father had actually wanted to experiment on her. That's, I don't know if we've ever pinpointed that, but seems likely, and had chosen to expose his family to a radioactive area. Her dad ended up curing Jessica of her illness by giving her a serum based off of spiders and putting her into stasis basically for years so she could heal. Now, by the time that she was healed and emerged from the tube she was held in, she was a young adult, although admittedly she was, as I said, healed, and she now had superpowers. But what she didn't have at the time, of course, was life experience, because she had pretty much spent all of her time in a tube. She had spent most of her life thus far in a tube in a suspended state, so it's easy to see how initially she got used as a pawn of Hydra's. There is also a version of her origin where Jessica was actually a woman who started out as a spider who simply evolved into a human form, which is even more bonkers of a story. Fortunately, this was later retconned to be a false memory implanted in Jess's mind, so that's how we make sense of that, although it is still a weird detail that someone would be like, yeah, I'm just gonna mess with her and make her think she evolved from a spider. Why not? And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love when I talk about weird comic book stuff, I love talking about weird comic book stuff, check out our Top 10 Weirdest playlist. We all talk about weird stuff over there. It's a lovely playlist. Number 9, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers' origin started out weird and only got weirder with time, it seems. This one is weird to me especially because I feel like it was kind of given a retcon that it didn't really need, but it got it anyways. But at the same time, I also acknowledge that the retcon may have simply been added to make Carol's origins make more sense or appear more streamlined. Carol Danvers was a security guard who ended up acting as an ally for and falling in love with the original Mar-Vell. At one point, her life was endangered by Mar-Vell's vengeful rival Yon-Rogg when the device known as the Psyche Magnetron exploded. In that moment, Carol wished that she was more like Mar-Vell, and so she became as such, because that's what happens when you get caught in a Psyche Magnetron explosion. She ended up manifesting similar powers and adopting the superhero moniker Miss Marvel. Years later, Carol has taken up the mantle of her former mentor, Captain Marvel, which is why we know her as such now, and has also learned that apparently this whole time, on her mother's side, she was actually half Kree, which is the same alien race that Mar-Vell belonged to, which also, I guess in part, accounts for her abilities manifesting. Though I think it's kind of fine that like kind of a wishing machine just allowed her to have those abilities. I think that makes sense too, but half Kree, let's do it. Number 8, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is Chuck Tane, and not only is he ridiculous in terms of his own abilities and appearance, but so is his origin story. He's known for being a member of the futuristic superhero team, the Legion of Superheroes, or he's known before eventually being a member of that team. This team hails from the 31st century, where they're teen heroes who are known not just for protecting the Earth, but also any other worlds that belong to the group known as the United Planets. Bouncing Boy himself initially was not considered good enough in the original continuity to join the Legion, trying out and failing to be accepted twice prior to finally securing his place on that team. Probably because of how odd his powers are, honestly. One day during a sports match, he made the mistake of drinking super plastic fluid by accident, which is what gave him the ability to basically inflate himself and turn himself into a human bouncing rubber ball. Why we call him Bouncing Boy. Number 7. Hellboy. Some might not think Hellboy's origins are that weird, but I would challenge that line of thinking. I think Hellboy's origins only seem normal because we know him so well at this point. But it's pretty weird that an organization who is kind of known for hunting monsters would retrieve him after he was summoned by a dark World War II German cult and apparently is destined to bring about a massive apocalyptic event, and yet would still choose to raise and adopt him and just raise him up among their ranks. It just seems like an odd choice, I think, when we consider his origins. I love it for him, but it's weird. Number 6. Vampirella. Vampirella has to have one of the weirdest origin stories ever. Possibly one of the reasons that I love her so much. Especially when you consider how many times it has straight up changed on her. She's had a lot of retcons in her origins. I think my favorite one though, my favorite version of her origin though, is still kind of the weirdest by most people's standards. Her first origin. Although to me, this one actually feels a lot simpler than the rest of what we were given for Vampy later on with Lilith and Hell and all that stuff. I'm not talking about that aspect of her origin, but instead I'm talking about Draculon, the original Draculon, which initially was a whole other planet in outer space where a bunch of other alien vampires like Vampirella lived. Instead of having water on their planet, blood flowed through and around it. But after a catastrophic event where all the blood basically kind of like dried up, they had like a major drought, Vampy left her homeworld for Earth. She even makes her way to Earth in a very interesting fashion, basically kind of like hijacking the spaceship of some astronauts who crash landed on Draculon after discovering that the life force energy powering them, their blood, is actually drinkable to her and can act as a food source. Very strangely convenient, and I love it. Number 5. Silk. Silk just had a really weird life in general, never mind her origin story, although that admittedly is also pretty weird, which is why she's on my list. Sydney Moon was one of those folks who was created as a character later in terms of comic history, but who was woven into the fabric of the original history as though she was kinda always there. She went to the same school as Peter and happened to be bitten by the same radioactive spider. However, she learned much earlier on about spider totems and as a result was hidden away in a bunker for years, growing up without much contact with the outside world. She also has a whole thing tied to Peter when it comes to her origins in terms of her feeling real frisky around him because they were bitten by the same spider. But fortunately, that's in the past now. But that was a thing, and it was weird. Number 4. Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder is just straight up weird, and I feel like weird is a timid way of putting that. I don't know if we'd actually even call him a hero, a straight up superhero, based on the fact that what he does sounds kind of villainous actually, but he is supposedly a part of a superhero team, albeit a kind of terrible superhero team, but still I feel like we kind of need to count him, even though I myself am very skeptical about categorizing him as a hero, but he is categorized as such in the comics, so here we go. The original Dog Welder was downright dastardly, but Dog Welder 2, his successor, is at least not really fully in control of what he does and definitely has, one of the weirdest origin stories ever as a result, so at least he's a little bit better but also weirder. He ended up stumbling upon the original Dog Welder's equipment and became possessed by it, compelled to weld dogs to people. Despite having what seemed to be a happy life with his family, Dog Welder 2 could not stop himself, could not resist the urge from welding his kids to the dog. As a result, his wife divorced him and later remarried. That's what you do. Also, what a weird story. Also the fact that he's still holding out hope, like maybe one day I'll be able to talk to them again. I don't think you come back from that, my friend. I think you're done. Number 3. Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck hails from a planet known as Duck World, where apparently ducks are not only intelligent, but also, coincidentally, happen to speak English, as so many on Earth do. What a coincidence. As weird as that sounds though, what's even weirder is the way Howard got to Earth, which is kinda debated in in the comics, with a few different stories telling this tale. Although I personally like the version where it's mentioned that Florida is basically located at the center of the nexus of all realities of Earth 616, which I think is pretty wild and pretty funny and kind of great. I also love that in that version of the story, that's kind of where like Howard first appeared, was in the Everglades in Florida. It's just funny because he obviously is also supposed to be a parody on Donald Duck, so yes. Number 2, Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff has one of the most simple and yet at the same time convoluted origins in all of comics. Initially, she was simply a young woman who was a mutant and was saved by Magneto alongside her brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver. Feeling indebted to Magneto for saving their lives from an angry mob, they pledged themselves to Magneto's cause, serving him as members of his Brotherhood of Mutants, or Brotherhood of Evil Mutants if you prefer. However, later on, we learned that Magneto was also their dad, and that the children were simply adopted by the Maximoffs. It's kind of have like two groups of parents. Wanda's magic would go from mutant originating hex powers to being tied to Chthon to chaos magic to simply just magic that was passed down from her mother, who was also known for being a powerful witch. And Magneto would go from being unaware father to birth father to emotionally complicated dad to Magneto, you are not the father. And more recently was like more of an adopted father to Wanda and Pietro himself before he kick the bucket, although he'll probably be back at some point soon if he's not already at the time of this recording. Wanda would go from being mutant outcast to mutant villain to mutant pretender, having been revealed as someone who was simply made to look like a mutant after being experimented on very early in life by the High Evolutionary for some reason, and finally back to being cool with mutants again after she was able to help them access sort of lost consciousness backups for mutants long thought lost and therefore unresurrectable. Basically, Scarlet Witch is just weird. That's the only way it goes. Doesn't matter what part of the origin story we're at, it's crazy. Number 1, Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones is another one of those characters who is retroactively given close ties to other heroes, with her character having been created later on in the early 2000s. But if you thought Silk was wild, Jessica goes pretty crazy into that. She had a crush on Human Torch, went to the same school and was in the same grade as Peter Parker, and her dad worked for Tony Stark. What? She would end up being exposed to radioactive chemicals in a tragic car crash that the rest of her family perished in. During her first flight, where she lost control of her powers, Thor saved her. Thor. Shortly after this, Jessica would take up the superhero name of Jewel and would end up almost immediately afterward being controlled by the Purple Man and forced to do what he bid her. All in all, her origin is pretty messed up and also just pretty wild. Number 10, Batman. Batman has undergone a lot of changes over the years. Remember when he had a rainbow wardrobe? But even if we're not talking about how he went from black to color back to full-on black in his outfit in the comics, one doesn't have to look far to see how magically he seems to have transformed. Let's even just look at Batman on the screen. Batman used to have his own series in the 1960s where Adam West was famous for his role as the Caped Crusader. But while this might be your Batman, today if you put Adam West's bats next to Ben Affleck's Batman, you might notice some drastic changes. And who knows what it'll be like when we put him next to Robert Pattinson. His suit has gone from spandex tights to full-on armor, and he has become dazed. Not going to lie, I kinda miss the days when a dad bod was considered fit enough to be a superhero. Bring the dad bods back. Number 9, Daredevil. Have you always thought of Daredevil as a skilled and trained martial artist who could even be considered a ninja? Yes? Well, you're wrong. In fact, Daredevil was originally introduced as a hero who received superpowers from the same radioactive material that blinded him. So while we now think of him as just a normal dude who has enhanced senses and is a trained fighter, originally his superpowers extended beyond his senses. It seemed his run-in with the radioactive materials had granted him enhanced agility and strength as well, though he was already in pretty great shape previously from his boxing training. That's right, he got all that fitness from boxing training, not from becoming a ninja. It wasn't until writer Frank Miller introduced the idea of him being trained by Stick at a young age to become the skilled fighter he is today that this was even a thing, his martial arts stuff. And by the way, that didn't happen until over 20 years after Daredevil's introduction. This changed very much the way the character was written and perceived by readers. It made him more human, more relatable, and it made it easier really to turn his world upside down, which Matt Murdock has had happen to him many times over in the comics, especially during Frank Miller's run, but not exclusively. Everyone likes to turn his world upside down. Number 8, Jubilee. Jubilee was first introduced in Uncanny X-Men issue 244, and would later become popularized through the 1990s X-Men animated series. That's where I remember first falling in love with her. She had explosive powers that were often illustrated as her having the ability to short-circuit tech and create fireworks. Later we would go on to find that Jubilee was so much more powerful than we originally thought, as her explosions work on an atomic level. In fact, even on a subatomic level you could say. Meaning that she could create explosions with a similar devastating effect to a nuclear bomb. But while she and her power set would grow during her time with the X-Men, she would also undergo another transformation that would change her drastically. She became a vampire. While she was later cured of her vampirism, this was an interesting time in Jubilee's life that many would have opinions on. Most people either completely love it or completely hate it. We'd also see Jubilee take on more responsibility and become an adult and mom. A big change from when we met her in the animated series as a young teen mall rat who lived in the mall. She was a mall rat, she just hung out at the mall all the time, and she also lived there, so literally. Number 7. Wonder Woman. Remember that time Wonder Woman was depowered and made a martial artist trained spy? No? Well, it happened. You may remember the days when Wonder Woman was no more than Justice Society of America's honorary member and secretary. But do you remember her weird mod-inspired spy adventures? This happened during Danny O'Neill's run in the late 1960s. After losing her powers, Wonder Woman became Diana Prince, and was trained in martial arts by Ai Cheng. Oh, comics in the 60s. Ai Cheng, what a name. Fortunately, the outcry of comic book fans everywhere saw her transform back to her Amazonian superpowered self as Wonder Woman. Number 6. Thor. Not only have there been changes made to this character since his introduction to the MCU, where let's face it, Hemsworth basically became Thor, but since his introduction to the screen, he has changed quite a bit in appearance. Did you know that Thor appeared on television before he made his way to the big screen? Yeah. We have to go way back to the 80s for his first appearance, but it happened. Thor was first played by Eric Allen Kramer in the 1988 made-for-television movie The Incredible Hulk Returns, with Lou Ferrigno starring as the Incredible Hulk. This Thor resembled the more classic look of the comics, but also he had some very furry shoulder pauldrons instead of his classic cape, which is weird. When Hemsworth took up the mantle, he would look similar to this version of Thor, but swap out the furry pauldrons for the more comic book accurate red cape. And then he would go on to change the look of the character further when he shed those famous golden locks, sporting a shorter haircut in Thor Ragnarok, which oddly enough had a bit of a psychedelic 70s/80s vibe to it. So yeah, which Thor do you like more? Long hair Thor? Short hair Thor? Two eyes Thor? One eye Thor? Bionic eye Thor? All the eyes. I think Thor just needs more eyes, really. He should have like 6 eyes. Number 5. Captain America. That's right, we're talking about the black, red, and white costume, but not the full black one that Steve wore in the MCU, although there's definitely overlap in regards to story and look for sure in regards to these outfits. This actually happened in the 80s, and while you may recognize this look as USA agents, John Walker's, did you know that before Walker got the outfit, Cap donned it? He actually wore it after he was forced to go somewhat off the grid. See, ever since Cap had emerged from that ice block, he'd kind of been a bit of a free agent, till a mysterious government figure appeared wanting to use him for his own means. He even told Cap that he really had no choice, but Steve responded telling him he certainly did have a choice, as America is a free country. Cap rebelled, getting his new outfit and shortening his mantle just to Captain, while the figure went on to find his own Captain America in John Walker. Later the two would swap outfits and Walker would go on to wear it as US agent. Number 4. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. The most unacceptable transformation of them all to me. Not only were these two drastically transformed for the big screen in the MCU, Scarlet Witch herself has gone on to continue to change dramatically actually since her cinematic introduction, even losing her accent and completely changing her costume, but they also underwent a huge change in the comic book world as well. If you're super familiar with my biggest comic book gripes, then you might know what I'm about to mention here. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver had a very mysterious past originally in the comics, until it was later revealed that they were actually the children of Magneto and were mutants. Scarlet Witch herself would change mutant kind forever when she altered reality during the events of House of M. She and Quicksilver had become a big part of the mutant world, but then it turned out that they weren't mutants. In fact, they weren't even Magneto's kids. What? During the Axis event, Scarlet Witch attempted to cast a spell to harm those of her blood, but although it worked on Quicksilver, it did not work on Magneto, revealing that he was not the father. Turned out that they'd actually been disguised as mutants by the High Evolutionary, and all the history, all the drama, all the emotion that we thought we knew just fell away and no longer really mattered. Just threw it out with the trash. Can't believe that. This is one of the most devastating transformations and retcons ever. For me at least. Hopefully it was for you too, and you feel my fury. Number 3, Power Girl. That's right, we're gonna talk about that loss of the window. Gotta let Power Girl have her cleavage. I'm pro that. Just FYI. I'm pro cleavage. Not only has Power Girl had her past retconned multiple times over, like when she was all of a sudden Atlantean, like Aquaman for some reason, but we have also seen drastic and shocking changes come about in regards to her costume. For years, Power Girl was known for her leotard outfit with its little peekaboo window on the front, showcasing Power Girl's insane cleavage. This was a huge part of her look, and while it is very revealing, it was also just very Power Girl. Power Girl isn't the type to care what people think when it comes to what she wears. She is bold and strong, brave, and usually quite confident. She's her own woman. But in 2012, DC decided to redesign her costume and close up that window because how else could Power Girl be taken seriously, right? You can't have cleavage and be taken seriously, right guys? People revolted, and not just because they wanted to see more skin, but because Power Girl's costume is very much a part of her identity. Also, earlier on in the comics, didn't Power Girl say something like she would never close that window? She was like, I can never close it. And then she closed it. It's like, what? Excuse me? Number 2, Sam Wilson. Remember when writers transformed Falcon into the thug Snap Wilson? No? Well, this was definitely one that shocked readers at the time. Wilson first met Captain America in issue 117 of the original series. Rogers recognized the bravery in Sam and suggested he join him in fighting crime. Sam accepted and became Falcon. The two would become a regular and well-loved team until issue 185, when it was revealed that Sam was actually Sam Snap Wilson, an LA-based thug and gangster. Apparently Red Skull had brainwashed him into becoming the perfect partner for Cap, only so that he could later activate Snap and have him double-cross Captain America, causing pain to Steve over the loss of his partner and the betrayal of his trust. No one really liked this for Sam's storyline, as it retconned a past that was notable and good, which had made him a great African American superhero at the time and role model. Falcon would eventually become good again, but his past as Snap Wilson, unfortunately, seemed to stick around. It had been somewhat selectively forgotten by writers until it was addressed in the all-new Captain America series, where instead Snap Wilson would be established as the fake and brainwashed persona instead of the other way around. So Red Skull brainwashed him to be like Snap Wilson, and the whole time he was Sam Wilson. Which I like better for him, because that transformation was a bad one. And a sad one. Number 1, Superman. Superman hasn't just changed outwardly throughout the years, he has also gone a lot of power changes as well, and emotional changes. We have seen writers paint him in a less favorable light. In the Injustice games and comics, he becomes a superpowered dictator, basically ruling over everyone with an iron fist, for what he considered was the greater good, after snapping following the death of Lois Lane and his unborn child. There is Red Sun Superman as well, who grows up in the Soviet Union and ends up reluctantly teaming up with Brainiac to attack the US. Though, granted, he defects to being good after all that. His powers have gone in the main continuity from being virtually limitless up till the 80s, before being made quite specific. Originally, kryptonite weakened him, but later it was shown that Kal-El's exposure to kryptonite could actually be fatal and kill him. He also gained a weakness to magic and at his power's source, more directly linked to our sun's solar energy. Costume-wise, on screen we've seen him go from George Reeves, who played him in the 50s TV series Adventures of Superman, to Henry Cavill, who played him more recently in the Justice League film from 2017. One big difference is how much more muscular he's become, as well as the fact that his underwear no longer appears to be on the outside of his costume. In the post-Convergence comic book work, his costume was drastically different though, with a depowered Superman just running around on a motorbike in jeans and a t-shirt. So he's Transformation City over there, Superman. But he's also been around for a really long time, so unsurprisingly we gotta change him up every now and then.
Kicking off the list at number 10 is the Ultimate Red Skull. In the Ultimate Universe, Steve Rogers and his girlfriend at the time, Gail Richards, shared a sweet night of romance together way back in 1945, just before he went and got himself popsicled. 9 months later, out popped a sweet baby that the government decided needed to be kept a secret. They took the boy into foster care on a military base, training him to become a super soldier to take the place of his missing and frozen father. He soon became stronger and even more tactically skillful than Captain America was, but Even though he seemed to be the perfect soldier, Rogers' son had in reality been carefully planning his escape. Now fast forward to 1963 when he was finally at the age of 17 and the son went off the handle, removing all the doctors and soldiers at his facility of their lives. If you didn't gather that this guy was absolutely insane, he also used a kitchen knife to remove the skin from his own head, officially and literally becoming the Red Skull. In rebellion against the system that created him, he becomes a mentally unstable assassin and tries to eventually steal Reed Richards' plans for the Cosmic Cube in order to use it to change history so he could grow up with his father. It was absolutely psychotic up until that very last point. Number 9. Dr. Doom. Victor Von Doom was the child of Romani people living in Latveria. His mother was a sorceress, and after her passing at the hands of Mephisto, resulting in her soul being held hostage by the Hell Lord, and the later passing of his father, Victor began to study her books, teaching himself the dark arts, while also developing a keen scientific mind which made him a legendary scientist and inventor at a very young age. This led to him being tracked down by the US military and offered further education in the United States. It was here that he met Reed Richards, and the two became intellectual rivals. Doom wanted nothing more than to save his mother from the hold of Mephisto, so he became obsessed with developing a machine that could project the astral form of a being into other dimensions, seeing it as a way to free his mother's soul from Mephisto. One day, Reed Richards went into Doom's dorm without permission and saw that he was working on the device, but Reed saw it as an unstable dimensional portal to an unknown realm and pointed out all the ways that it wouldn't work. Doom refused to listen since he was peed off at Reed for going into his dorm and looking at his stuff, but also because Doom's plans were based on an understanding of the supernatural that Reed just didn't appreciate. Reed, however, was right, and the machine ended up blowing up in Doom's face, literally, causing him to be disfigured. Despite that initial failure, through magic and other means, once a year, every single year, Doom would challenge Mephisto for the fate of his mother's soul, and he almost always loses. Number 8. Ultimate Mr. Sinister. Again, in the Ultimate Universe, Mr. Sinister is reimagined as a former bioengineer who specialized in urban stealth and mind-altering substances to create a super soldier who could evade any form of detection and hypnotically persuade others. Unfortunately, his superiors refused to allow Nathaniel Essex to test his research on human subjects, so he experimented on himself and acquired superhuman powers. But he also became a schizophrenic street thug with a white tank top, weird tattoos, and a proclivity for gunning down mutants to please his Lord Apocalypse. But his Lord Apocalypse isn't even real, and it's just a hallucination / an effigy Sinister has constructed out of trash. This Lord Apocalypse inside of Sinister's head would preach about ushering in a, quote, final age of mutant dominance or the end of the world. But to do so, Sinister apparently had to remove 10 innocent mutants from existence. 4 issues of the X-Men chasing down a delusional mutant murderer were some of the best from the Ultimate X-Men's extended run. Number 7. Earth 17 Overman. On Earth 17, that appeared very briefly in Animal Man issue number 23, superheroes are a product of government experiments. The Superman of this universe is called Overman, and he was the first hero with all the other heroes being spawns of his own DNA. That seems pretty normal for a comic book. It feels very The Boys. But just like The Boys, things get really weird. Overman ends up catching some kind of promiscuously transmitted disease from another person, which somehow drives him completely insane. Overman destroys Earth 17's Justice League and reduces the entire world to rubble. And that was all before he gets his filthy paws on an incredibly powerful Doomsday device that he intends to use to wipe Earth 17 out completely. But before he does that, he is temporarily transported to the main DC universe. The Crisis on Infinite Earths destroyed this reality, which seems like an effort by DC to destroy such a naughty Superman story. They even created different, less weird, but still evil iterations of Overman, like an Overman who became allied with the Axis powers in World War II. But the internet, we never forget that kind of thing, you weirdos. Number 6. Dex-Starr. It's true, the Red Lantern of Sector 2814, Dex-Starr, is an irrationally rage-filled kitten cat, and he's scary. But it's all because he really loved his owner, which is kinda sweet. Dex-Starr's origin shows the cat Dexter with his owner when she is attacked by robbers who broke into her home. While Dexter tried his best to scratch the attackers, they ended up bringing a close to the life of Dexter's owner. When the police showed up on the scene though, Dexter was kicked out into the streets so he wouldn't contaminate the scene. So this cat lost his owner and his home. That's bad enough, but then two sickos from the streets found Dexter when he was trying to sleep, put him in a sack, and threw him into a river. This unbelievable and unfortunate sequence of events filled this poor little kitty with enough pure unbridled rage that it caught the attention of Atrocitus, who called out to him and made Dexter a Red Lantern. With this newfound power of the Red Lantern ring, the Rage Kitty exacted sweet revenge on the sickos who sacked him and flew to say goodbye to his owner one last time, saying in his little cat language, "I find who hurt you, I kill, I good kitty." Number 5, the Joker. There are many variations of the Joker's origin story, with no one version being officially accepted. And that's because he either doesn't remember the real one, doesn't want to tell anyone, or is just so insane that he makes up a new one every single time. It's part of what makes the Joker so compelling. The most popular of his origin stories, though, sees him as a civilian named Jack. Jack leaves behind a career as a chemical engineer to go into stand-up comedy. When he fails miserably, he turns to a gang of criminals in order to support his pregnant wife. The criminals name him Red Hood and set up a robbery at a chemical plant, threatening and or taking the life of his family in order to force Jack into working with them. At the plant, the gang are taken down by security, and in the terror of seeing Batman as he fled away, Red Hood / Jack falls into a vat of chemicals. When he emerged being drastically physically altered, he also ends up having a complete and very drastic psychotic breakdown and focuses obsessively on Batman for the rest of his life. Number 4, Monsieur Mallah and the Brain. When I tell you that a super intelligent French militant gorilla named Monsieur Mallah and a disembodied brain belonging to a French scientific genius and master criminal are not only the primary leaders of the Brotherhood of Evil, but are also in a relationship together, then you know this is gonna be wild. So, Monsieur Mallah and the Brain, who were villains to both the Doom Patrol and the Teen Titans, first appeared in Doom Patrol number 86 in 1964. Brain was once a scientist who experimented on the gorilla who would become Mallah, increasing Mallah's intelligence. Unfortunately, an accident injured Ernst, the scientist, and Mallah had to remove Ernst's brain and place it in a technological holding device to keep him alive and able to communicate. And thus, the villainous duo were born. The two are almost always together, with Mallah usually carrying around the brain. Their story and even the characters themselves are odd to say the least, but so are the Doom Patrol, so it all just kind of makes sense in the end, doesn't it? Number 3. Bane. Bane was born inside the feared Pena Duro prison on Santa Prisca, an island in the Caribbean Sea, after his father, Edmund Dorrance, escaped and had the corrupt government transfer his life sentence to his unborn child. That alone is just so messed up. This child was forced to serve his father's prison sentence, is named Bane by a prison warden after he took the first of many lives while still growing up. Bane spends his time in prison building himself into the perfect specimen of physical and mental ability, teaching himself strategy, philosophy, languages, and mathematics, while also turning his body into the example of peak fitness and strength. Bane becomes the, quote, king of the prison and is its most feared inmate. Being such an incredible specimen of a human being, Bane is selected for use in a super soldier experimental program being injected with a lethal substance called Venom. But unlike any other before him, Bane not only survives, but he finds the Venom further enhances his already outstanding physical abilities, but with the caveat that it must be taken every 12 hours. To help that, a system of tubes is installed on Bane to pump Venom directly into his system. It's not too long after that Bane sets his sights on dominating Gotham City and its bat-themed protector. In at number 2, it's Cheetah. Cheetah was initially a famous archaeologist named Dr. Barbara Ann Minerva. She was a bit, I don't know what's the word, quirky? With an obsessive love of artifacts and not much of a care for other human beings. But still, she wasn't exactly evil. Not at first. Minerva stumbled upon an ancient tribe in Africa that was protected by a female guardian with the powers of a cheetah. Super cool, cool. So cool that when she is told the legend of this female hero by a witch doctor, she believes she can become the next Cheetah. To do this, Minerva has to become the bride of a plant god by the name of Kartaga. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. She fulfills all of the requirements to become his bride, ingesting a mixture of human blood, berries, and his leaves, but while things seem to be going smoothly, she was not told the key requirement, that she needs to be a virgin. Since Minerva is not a virgin, she is instead cursed to suffer severe pain when she's in human form and have an insatiable bloodlust whenever she turns into Cheetah. And finally, in at number 1, it's Armless Tiger Man. If any of you know me, then you know Gustav Hertz was going to make this list. Gustav worked in a mechanical laboratory in Munich, Germany during the 1940s, but unfortunately for Hertz, one day his arms got caught in a machine and had to be amputated. While this is a horrible thing to happen to anyone, Gustav did survive the experience, and he was later given reading material on how to operate day to day without arms, instead using his mouth and feet to complete daily tasks. Turns out that he was really good at this. Hertz developed ridiculous skill in using his teeth and feet. He even took things a couple steps further. He sharpened his teeth into fangs that he could use as weapons and tools, and he even developed above average levels of strength and dexterity in his jaw, legs, and toes, allowing him to bend steel with his mouth, kick really hard, and throw daggers with his toes. He ends up proving how capable he was as a World War II enemy of the hero Angel and an enemy of Wakanda, where he was completely destroyed by that era's Black Panther.